That was awesome. 1/1000th of a second. It was closer than Atlanta earlier this year. It was closer than Dega in 2011. It was closer than Craven and Busch in 2003 at Darlington. That finish was absolutely insane. And I am still living off the high of the last night that we've had, basically seeing everyone talking about NASCAR and this great finish. And I think that it's overshadowing something, and for a good reason, and that is that the race in its totality was awesome as well. Yes, the finish deserves the props it's getting, but the opening 267 laps before that finish were worth the wait of a rain delay, were worth the waiting through, quote unquote, to get to that finish. There were great battles throughout the night, especially in stage one, constant battling for the lead up front between Larson, between Bell, between Chastain, you name it. If they were good last night, they were up there at some point in the first stage. But there were also great strategies, tire and fuel strategies as well. Guys making up 10 seconds on the leader during a run because they pitted later and got fresher rubber. And then at the end, you had guys who were hoarding tires like Kyle Larson was at the run to the initial finish, as well as a fuel mileage race that saw Martin Truex Jr. and others charging up through the field. If you didn't like last night's race, you're not a NASCAR fan. That's the only thing I can think of at this point. Either that or you're upset that your driver didn't do well or something like that. I do not understand for the life of me, as someone who is relatively impartial to the drivers out there competing, I do not understand how people don't like this race if they're NASCAR fans. And I think all around, everything a NASCAR fan wants was in this race. You got your wrecks if you want wrecks. You got your hard racing. You got your fuel strategy and fuel mileage and strategy racing. You got your amazing beating and banging finish that didn't involve wrecking up the whole field. You got an all-time close finish. And I think that at this point, we need to ask one major question. How do we get more of this? And, well, it's cookie cutter races. As insane as it seems, as someone who's been a fan since the 2000s, and all of my life I've just known of these cookie cutters being so unpopular, they've suddenly, with the next gen car, probably accidentally, become the best racing consistently on the schedule. And while I don't think we need to have as many as we had back in the 2000s, I do think that the number we have now of 8 or 9, if you want to count Michigan, I don't know if that's necessarily enough. You got Las Vegas and Kansas twice. I think those two tracks are really, really good. Texas is down to 1 date, and it's pretty crazy. Charlotte is at 1 date with the 600, as the other race is a road course. You got, I guess you could count Nashville, as well as Michigan, like I said, and then you got Homestead. Atlanta Super Speedway is a big success. They are not changing it back to a normal intermediate as much as many fans who've watched for a while like me would love. So what I want to do is look through a few options here. Maybe 3 or so that we could add or change so that we could get this kind of racing more often. And instead of maybe 8 or 9 races a year on these kind of good intermediate tracks, we're looking more at a 10 to 12. Not necessarily too much outside the box or outside what we're doing now. I don't want to get rid of short tracks. I still think we need more than 2 or 3 road course races. I think 4 or 5 is fine, especially when you fix the car up. But I do want to see what we can do to make this kind of good racing something that's more of a reality more often. I think the easiest one you can do is the Roval going back to the oval at Charlotte. In my opinion, it's the easiest because while the Roval was worth the experiment, and it did pay off in the initial years, it has run its course. Attendance, at least on TV, visually looks down, and on top of all that, the ratings aren't exactly great for road courses, and this one has went down a ton since the initial experiment, and the racing with the next gen on these cars and tracks is just not good. And the entire reason that this race was made was for the inverse of this. The racing at the intermediates with the Gen 6, even with the 550, especially with it actually, was awful. It was terrible racing, or at least mediocre, and most fans were bored with it. Meanwhile, we were in the midst of a boom when it came to fans liking road courses. Road course racing, in many people's eyes, had kind of joined short track racing as that beaten and banging old school type of talent-based racing, and we wanted more of it. And with the Gen 6, I think that the experiment worked. Unfortunately, like I said, it just does not work with this car, and I think you just need to do the inverse of what we did before. Go back to what worked with the oval. I think more fans will like that on television. More fans, I think, will also like that in person because this race was, for all intents and purposes, a gimmick. And it was a gimmick that worked, but now just the Overton window was changed. Pull a reverse of the way it began, and we at least can look back fondly on the great memories and know that this race, the Roval race, was what kicked off basically NASCAR's reformation in the schedule of changing it every year instead of being the same one for 15 years. Second one we can do, and I think this one is actually more realistic than people think, is Chicagoland Speedway. I am biased. I went to Chicagoland since 2007 until its closing for COVID, and I'm not gonna try and lie about it. I am biased on this. I think that it should come back for selfish reasons as well as for unselfish reasons. And I think that after the Chicago contract ends, you need something in that market for all the work that NASCAR's put in. If it doesn't work at that point, I can understand moving on for good from it, but I don't understand at this time, especially since the Bears didn't buy this up for their stadium, and especially since it's not being torn down, it's being upkept. There is racing that has been going on at this facility. I do not understand letting it sit there and do nothing with it for now. It's a sister track of Kansas, but it has way older pavement, 23 years old for that matter. And because of this, I think you can have some great tire degradation as well as just overall great racing with the next gen car. This could realistically be the new Atlanta Motor Speedway, and I think because of that, you'd see fans flocking to watch it and drivers flocking to have it back. I'm not going to close my eyes or put my head in the sand and just say that this is all great. There are issues, and one that many have been bringing up is attendance. Not going to lie, 2018 and 19 were bad. Rain was threatening, but that's not an excuse that I think every track needs to use, and I hate it being used nowadays. NASCAR fans will go through anything to watch a race if they want to see it, and unfortunately, many in the Joliet area did not want to see it. But let's also not pretend that the pre-COVID attendance numbers in general weren't horrid. And one of these tracks you could look at is Pocono. So now, look at it today with some changes and better marketing, it is flourishing. But also, when it comes to making money, Chicagoland doesn't need attendance even to be great. No track really does. What they get is the TV money. And with TV, I think Chicagoland is not as bad off as many might think. In 2019, even delayed 2 or 3 hours or so, it got as many viewers as Sonoma and Pocono the weeks before. And 2018 saw similar viewership to the August Michigan race and a revitalized Southern 500. It's not necessarily going to be a banger when it comes to people watching, and I don't think it's going to get as high in numbers as a NASCAR race 6 or 7 years ago did, but let's not pretend that this is going to be the lowest of the low. That actually is the Bristol night race. With the effort that NASCAR has put into growing the Chicago market, it would be foolish to let it just go away after 3 years in the city. And also, I think that one other track that many are bringing up, and I will admit I'm at least softening to, if not a little bit wondering with, is the Kentucky Speedway. I am not very high on this option. I never liked Kentucky. I think it also would eat into the Nashville market, both for Nashville Superspeedway and eventually the fairgrounds. But if Kentucky will work, it's gonna be with the next-gen car. I'm willing to give it a one-off. Not 2 or 3 or 4 years, but maybe 1 year to prove that it can have good enough racing and draw eyes in. It didn't do it before, but if it can do it this time, maybe I'd be okay with this. But I feel like it'd have similar issues as Texas, but after Kansas, I'm willing to try any intermediate at this point, because if we get something like what we saw for an entire race at Kansas at Kentucky, I think everyone will be happy with that. So, if all 3 of these options are used, we'd have 11 or 12 cookie cutter races, at least for points, instead of the 8 or 9 depending on how you count it, that we currently have now, which is still less than the 14 to 15 that we had in the 2000s during the cookie cutter boom. So, to me, I think that these are at least something to think of when it comes to scheduling options in the future for NASCAR if you want to see the best possible racing. Now I want to leave it to you. Do you think that more cookie cutters should be added back to the NASCAR schedule as NASCAR fixes the short track and road course packages? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more great and fun NASCAR content. Thank you so much to all my channel members for your continued support, and until next time, have a good one.